So adopting a self-care consciousness requires getting to a place where I can put myself first. This is not about being selfish or self-centered, simply about putting ourselves and our needs first. Now I know it sounds like a fine point, but self first, even though you might feel like it's very similar to selfish, it's not. Because I really think that, selfishness has been given a bad rap. It's not that big of a deal. Because unless we have some form and some level of self-interest, how do we truly live life on our own terms? To me, it's a no-brainer. But let's get into it a little bit further. So, what's the difference between selfish and self-first? Well, I suggest that putting ourselves first is about thinking about myself and my needs before I begin to think about and consider the needs of others. I think this is a really significant distinction and a really important point. Self first is about thinking about myself, considering my needs, considering what I want, and then considering the needs of my boss, the needs of my family, the needs of my spouse, my significant other, my family, my friends. It's about thinking first about myself, getting clear about what I need and want, and then considering the needs of others. No self-care program can possibly succeed if I'm not willing to at least consider putting myself and my needs first. That's not meaning that I don't consider other people's needs, but that I just begin with myself, what I think, what I want. It's a huge distinction. It's a small distinction that can make a huge difference. The reason that it can make such a huge difference is because when we get caught up pleasing other people, we just forget about ourselves. And what ends up happening, I know in my case, I just compromised or ignored my own needs because I'm so caught up in pleasing other people and making sure that they get what they need that I forget about myself, about what I need. And in the process, I end up compromising or setting aside or putting on hold what I need and want, my needs. I have to think about my needs. It's all about me. Because until I make it all about me, I can't be totally present to be with others and to be unselfish and to be giving and loving. I challenge you and I invite you to prove this philosophy, to prove it right or prove it wrong, and simply try adopting a self-first perspective and see what happens. See what your experience is. Because if I'm not going to put myself first and begin thinking about myself first, I'm going to be caught on the treadmill of selfishness. And the treadmill of selfishness is when I'm pursuing other people and trying to get my needs met by living vicariously through other people, by working to manipulate other people, and adjusting my behavior or trying to make sure that I get my needs met through others. That's really selfish because I'm not giving from a place of abundance. I'm taking from others to fill myself up. And here's the key distinction. I'm doing that because I'm not willing to give it to myself first. I'm taking it from others to get what I need to be giving to myself. And so just prove this philosophy. Try it. I'll prove it right or prove it wrong, and let's see what happens. Let me know what your experience is and how it goes for you. So the key question is, how do we live this self-first perspective? Well, the first step is self-awareness. I have to begin to, the first step is in taking the self-first perspective, which we've already talked about. So, but the key thing is, how do we do that? What are the areas in my life where I'm being selfish? What are the relationships and situations that I'm in where I put myself last? And where in my life have I been putting myself first? So here's what I like to recommend that you do. Let's create a worksheet. Either if you've taken the seminar, you've got the worksheet. It's that 3-column worksheet, and that worksheet has at the top of it 3 columns: selfish on the left, self last on the center column, and self first on the last column. So simply take a piece of paper, divide it into 3 columns, and then put selfish, self last, and self first at the top of each column. Pause the video now and make and record and make notes of the areas of your life where you are exhibiting selfish behavior, where you're getting your needs met through others instead of working with yourself to get your needs met. Identify the relationship situations and that you find yourself in where you're putting yourself last, or I guess another way of looking at it is where you're putting others' needs first. And then, where are some examples in your life where you actually do think of yourself first? So pause the video and do this work, because we're going to use it a little bit later and in the next workshop. I thought it might be helpful for me to define with a little bit more detail and clarity what I mean by selfish, self last, and self first. In the case of selfish, this is where I'm concerned chiefly or only with myself and my needs and getting an advantage. And the key point here is to the exclusion of others. When I'm really focused on being selfish, I'm really focused on getting my needs met to the exclusion to make sure that I get an advantage, but I'm excluding others from that. In the self-last perspective, I'm more concerned with meeting others' needs, and the only time I think of myself is if there's time, money, and energy left at the end of the day that I'll consider my needs. So the self-last perspective is all about meeting others' needs, not my own. Now, a self-first perspective is where, as I've explained, I'm considering my needs first, and then I look at the needs of others, and then I make a decision. That's the key point. Is in the self-first perspective, I'm thinking of myself first, considering others and my relationship with them, and then I use that information to make a decision about moving forward in my life or in the relationship, and sometimes it might involve saying no. So take a moment, work on your worksheet, and identify your selfish, your self-last, and the areas where you've put yourself first. So how did you do? So how was your worksheet? Were you able to find some examples where you've been selfish and getting your needs met through others, where you're controlling and manipulating others to make yourself feel better? Were you able to identify some areas where you've been thinking about and putting yourself first, and then considering the needs of others? And what about the areas where you're putting other people's needs ahead of your own, and you've been developing and you've been putting your needs yourself last and putting others first? Because when we're putting others first, we're definitely not thinking of ourselves first. And when we put ourselves last, we're also very much in a place of selfishness because we're getting our needs met through others. The truth is that when you first start trying to implement the self-first perspective, it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel a sense of awkwardness and dis-ease because we've been so programmed and so conditioned to please others. I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, it's important to get along in this world, to live harmoniously with other people, and to come from a place of love and compassion and a place of givingness. However, when we're not considering our needs along with others, that's really more like we're being martyrs, and we're becoming dependent on others as opposed to being independent or interdependent. One of the things that it took me a while to learn and to get is the difference between short-term and long-term. And what I mean by that is that, you see, putting myself first pays long-term dividends. And the dividend that it pays is one of self-trust. Whereas when I put myself last, it actually depletes my self-trust. And in a certain way, it kind of projects a net negative forward because I'm so focused on meeting others' needs that my self-trust ends up turning into a negative instead of being a positive. Because where this, my self-first perspective allows me then to work on myself, to maintain my integrity, to be able to feel positive and good about what I'm doing, to know that what I'm doing is moving me forward towards the things that I most desire. Whereas when I put myself last and ignore my needs, it actually decreases my self-trust because I know that I need to be doing more than I'm doing, and yet I don't do it. And so the thing to remember is that putting yourself first is going to pay a long-term dividend, and that dividend is trust, because slowly and gradually I'm going to have a greater sense as to who I am, living in integrity, being congruent, having my values in alignment with my actions, and that I'm actually caring for, loving, and supporting myself in the process. So one of the greatest things I ever did, as I mentioned to you in previous workshops and videos, is that I set an intention to develop a self-care consciousness. I set the intention to love and care for myself and make my self-care a priority. And what I ended up getting, and what I didn't expect, was that by investing the time, effort, and energy, by setting the intention and then following through, it really increased my confidence. And so in a sense, setting an intention to put yourself first will give you a gift of confidence, because you're raising your consciousness, you're expanding your awareness, so that you can, by simply choosing to set the intention to put yourself first, that is going to expand your consciousness to be able to see areas that you hadn't seen before, that you weren't aware of how you'd been setting your needs aside or putting other people's needs ahead. And as a result, you're also going to end up indirectly giving yourself a gift of love. A gift of love and acceptance, because to put yourself first, you have to get to a place of acceptance that you're of value, that you're worthy of love and attention. And so self-first is all about setting the intention and then placing your intention. Intention precedes attention. Setting the intention, choosing to set the intention, putting yourself first, developing your self-care consciousness, and then giving yourself giving yourself your own attention. We're so busy doing for others. It really is like, I felt like I had to go to school again to remember how to give myself attention. And it's a remarkable gift to set time aside to be with myself, to do things for myself, to love and care for myself, to indulge myself, to be with myself and to just be and not have to do. So I move from being a human doing things to being a human being. So it all comes back to trusting yourself. And if there's no self-trust, it's going to be really difficult to trust others. And if I have no personal self-trust, how in the world can I possibly trust God or a higher power? And self-trust begins with learning and trying and working to put myself first, because I'm valuable, because I deserve to experience my highest and best for myself. We become so focused on serving others, so focused on meeting others' needs, that we forget about ourselves. I'm not suggesting that you're going to forget about serving others. I'm just suggesting that you're going to trust yourself enough that you're going to put yourself first. You're going to be number one, the number one consideration in your life. So on the last slide, I talked about self-trust. And one of the greatest challenges that I've had in my self-care journey is dealing with my own self-trust issues. So then what I want to do is give you a few tips about how you can deal with your self-trust issues. And the number one tip is I can say to you is always be willing to see your truth. To not avoid, but to confront yourself. To be willing to see the truth of your behaviors, the truth of your ineffective behaviors, the truth of your good behaviors, the truth of your dysfunction, your character defects, your faults. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just saying that we can't change what we're not aware of. So the key issue with self-trust, as with just about everything that I've been talking about in this self-care program, has to do with awareness. Am I willing to be aware, to see my truth? Because if I can see my truth, then I can do something about it. And so the way to do that is, if you're game and if you want to fast track this, is take the time and do a fearless searching trust inventory. When I did this, I was shocked, surprised, amazed, delighted, and I said surprised really at how many self-trust issues I had and how deep it went. But I can tell you with sincerity, it was well worth the time and effort. And I highly recommend, when you do this, is to share it with somebody and talk it through with somebody, because it'll help you to process it, release it, and let go. So the other thing I want to draw your attention to is that adopting a self-first perspective, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of making decisions. I said in the previous slide, awareness is really important. Well, in the same way, I can be aware of things, but if I'm not making decisions, if I'm not thinking about my new awareness and taking actions and making decisions based upon that, I'm probably not going to be able to experience what I want. And if that's occurring, that means I'm probably running into some roadblocks. My single biggest obstacle to practicing self-care and putting myself first was my propensity and tendency to be a people pleaser. I had to learn how to put my needs ahead of others' needs, because as long as I was continuing to put other people's needs ahead of my own, I ended up with a deep sense of self-contempt, self-judgment, and in some cases a deep self-loathing. And that was a lot of work to work through. That was took a lot of effort and energy and discipline and affirmations and working through the mental gymnastics to release myself from my own self-judgment, the contempt and the loathing and the anger and the frustration I felt towards myself because I was always putting my needs on hold. I was always putting other people's needs ahead of my own. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. So let me share with you 10 quick strategies for how you can begin to put yourself first. You know, you might not realize this, but putting yourself first, one of the key things we can do is to use the word no. I always like to say that no is a complete sentence. The other thing we can do is, say, well, I'll sleep on it before you make a commitment. Learn to use affirmations. Affirmations helped us to reprogram our mind and to change our focus and not be captured by our habitual thinking patterns, but begin to break free of that and move towards a more creative, conscious way of living. The other thing I highly recommend is to stop the stuffication of yourself. What I mean by that is stuffing things down. I was so good at stuffing myself. I literally sometimes felt like I couldn't breathe. I stuffed my feelings down. I stuffed and ignored my feelings because I was so focused on meeting others' needs, I totally ignored my own. And even though I was probably aware of them, I stuffed them down. Give yourself to feel emotions. Just allow yourself to feel things, but do it without judgment. Let yourself feel what you're feeling. Observe it because there are clues within there. The other thing I recommend is to beware of isolation. I became quite isolated because I was full of fear and I was frustrated and angry and all that self-loathing that I talked about earlier and the self-judgment. It was easier just to hide rather than to be out there. So I highly recommend that you schedule more time for yourself, more me time, and more time with your friends. Because you can find friends that you can be open with. There are friends in this training program that you can make, that you can reach out to, who will support you, and you'll have that common language. The other thing is pay attention to what's going on in your life. Are the things that you're putting your time, effort, and energy into a net additive or a net negative? And the idea is to slowly eliminate those things, those people, those relationships, those activities that are when you look at them, are overall a net negative influence on your life, and to move towards those things that are net additive. In other words, they're positive things. When you look at it, your time, effort, and energy, money, resources, and you look at the relationships, you look at the people, they are adding quality. They're adding to your life, improving your life. So I think it's a really significant opportunity. Number 8, acknowledge when you put yourself first. Acknowledge the fact that you put yourself first. Reward yourself. Affirm yourself. Honor yourself because you're doing it. I think another great one is to create a stop doing list. We got all kinds of to-do lists, but the truth is we need to incorporate a stop doing list. There are some things just need to stop doing, and there are other things I need to start doing. So I highly recommend to create 2 lists, a stop doing list and a start doing list. What that's going to do is the stop doing list, you might have figured out already, are things that are net negatives, and your start doing list is maybe you want to do more things that are net additives, or you want to add things that you think are going to be net additives. So there's 10 quick strategies about how you can put yourself first. Summarize. putting myself first is moving beyond being a people pleaser, moving beyond codependency, and working toward creating healthy relationships. What I've learned is as long as I was stuck in focusing on other people's needs, I was a first-class people pleaser, as long as I continued to do that, I really was going to struggle with my self-care. I was really going to struggle with resting and feeling comfortable in my own skin and living life on my own terms. I mean, the truth is I became aware about 25 years ago what a people pleaser I was. And really, I was pretty good at pleasing people, and in a lot of cases, it was just outright manipulation. And manipulation is not really a positive thing, is it? Manipulation isn't something that we really want to talk about or think about, because who wants to be a manipulator? Who wants to be known as a manipulator? Yeah, when I told my grade 1 teacher when I grow up I want to be a manipulator. And I'm going to be attending this self-care program talking about it. No, but I didn't do that, and nobody sets that intent. But we become people pleasers because there's so much in our society, our work, and our school system that rewards us for performance. And so in a way, we're getting rewarded and affirmed and built up for being a people pleaser. But being a people pleaser doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to give me what I want. I might get what I want short term, but long term, in terms of self-trust and being self-supportive and self-caring and loving towards myself, not guaranteed if I'm stuck in manipulation. So, what can we do about it? Well, the next slide is going to step into that and share with you some ideas that I have. So people pleasing is another way to explain codependency. Now, the dictionary defines codependency as, a psychological condition or a relationship in which somebody is being controlled or manipulated by someone else. And oftentimes, it's typically thought of in the case of an addiction, an alcoholic or a drug addict, that it tries to control or manipulate others so they can get to do what they want to do. Well, we can do the same thing. We don't have to be addicts to be codependent. Anytime we're changing our behavior to try to get what we want from another person, or we're trying to manipulate someone through our behavior so that we get what we want, or what we think we want from them, that's codependency. Codependency is not a happy place to be, because then I'm tethering my happiness, I'm tethering, how I view the world and what my life is going to be like to making others happy. And that's very unreliable, because the truth is we can't control anybody. So let's talk about the 4 patterns of codependence. There are denial patterns, low self-esteem patterns, compliance patterns, and control patterns. In the case of denial patterns, that's where I am going to minimize, alter, or deny my feelings or other people's feelings. And I'm probably going to struggle with identifying my own feelings. In the case of low self-esteem patterns, I'm going to struggle because I'm going to have a hard time making my own decisions. And I might be unable to ask others to meet my needs, to speak up and ask for what I need. And the other thing that happens with low self-esteem is I tend to value other people's approval over my own self-approval. In the case of compliance patterns of codependence, this is where I place a higher value on other people's opinions and feelings. And I'm actually fearful of expressing my own viewpoint that might be different from another, because I don't want to, because I'm afraid of being rejected or not fitting in, or the stress and tension that could come from a disagreement. And so what ends up happening is I stuff that down. Now, in terms of control patterns, when I'm, if I'm stuck in a control pattern, I'm trying to convince somebody of what I think that they should think or feel and how they should be. And when I'm in a very high end of feeling that control, I really want I want to give people advice. I want to tell them how to live their life. And quite often, it's probably not even asked for. So those are a bit of an overview of the patterns of codependence. And these are just some of the ones that I've seen in my own life that I've had to work on. And so I hope that helps you to take a moment and get a piece of paper and journal and write down those things that kind of resonate with you. Where are your denial patterns? Where does low self-esteem rear its head and become an issue and create a codependence or need to please others? And where is it that you're compliant to the extent that it hurts you? And how is it that you're trying to control others? By taking the time to look at these, it will feel really uncomfortable and really challenging, but what it will do is it'll help you to see your truth and to move past that so that you can be fully present within yourself, comfortable in your own skin. I forget exactly where I found this online, but I thought this was a really interesting overview of codependency. And so, how do I know that I'm codependent? Well, if I am needing to be needed and, as a result, trying to control someone's behavior, that's probably because and due to insecurity. Whereas when I'm trying to control someone else's behavior and I'm trying to do something and put extra effort and energy into changing their mind or some activity to try to avoid things or to deny to deny what's really going on, I'm probably caught in a pattern of being manipulative. Now, on the other hand, if I need to be needed and I'm continuing to express and get involved in things in excess, where I'm overly pleasing, I never disagree, I'm fearful of what others are going to say, so I don't speak up. Well, that's a bad habit, a bad thinking habit. And that gives you a bit of an example of when I'm trying to control someone's behavior, or I'm needing to be needed and I'm feeling insecure, or I have some really significant habits and tendencies that I tend to do over and over again. Those bad habits end up, when I'm trying to control someone else's behavior, end up being manipulative. And that's not a really fun place to live from because it's totally fear-based. And what we want to do is, from a self-care perspective, is move away from fear. We want to move away from fear and move towards love and acceptance of ourselves and others. Because when we move towards a place of love and acceptance, it's a totally different mindset, totally different energy, and I've got nothing to prove and just my life to live. So if I'm going to put myself first, I need to have healthy personal boundaries. And I define healthy personal boundaries as taking responsibility for my actions and emotions and not taking responsibility for the actions and emotions of others. Now that can be a real significant challenge sometimes because I may not have very good boundaries. But what I want to share with you next is how to set and create some boundaries from a self-care perspective. So here's a really brief overview of how to create some, it's kind of what I call Greg's Guide to Self-Care Boundaries. It's based on my own learning and observation. I have to admit, I still struggle with boundaries, and it's something I think having good, healthy personal boundaries is something that takes time and effort. It's an evolutionary thing. It's an expansion of consciousness, and it's something that takes time and repeated effort. So let's get into it. So what I've found is in order for me to have healthy personal boundaries and to be able to put myself first, I have to first accept that I have a right to have my own feelings, values, and beliefs, and that I have the right to express how I want to be treated. That is the essence of self-care. It's knowing what my beliefs, my values, and my feelings are, and living it to such a degree that when I need to, I will express to others exactly how I want to be treated. That is only one that's an important aspect of self-care. Because if I'm unable to tether or control or bridle my need for approval from others and get to a place of self-acceptance and self-approval and self-love, self-care is going to be elusive. Now, this particular one has been a real learning experience for me, and one that I've really had to work on. And that is when I feel a strong emotional charge, when I feel highly emotional about something, my first tendency is I want to deal with it. I want to dive right in and get on with it and figure it out. But that's because I feel insecure. That's because I want to change the other person because I want to get approval. But from a self-first perspective, from a self-care and self-first perspective, when I feel a strong emotional charge, I now try to follow these 4 steps. 1, I pause and reflect. I reflect on, hold on, I'm feeling really emotional. I'm feeling a real strong emotional charge here. What's going on? Then I need to take a look at what's the emotion. Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling fear? Am I feeling threatened? Am I anxious? What exactly is going on? And then I've found that once I've figured out the emotion that I'm feeling, then I'm able to figure out, and only then am I able to figure out what I want to say to the other person. And the key thing is to take the time to think before I take action. And actually, I'll change that. I think before I talk and express my emotions. So that's the key. This is a key aspect of boundaries, is to pause, reflect, get in touch with the emotions, figure out what I need to communicate, and before I begin talking and trying to change the other person. It isn't about changing the other person. It's about expressing and communicating what I need. I think the other key distinction is to just listen to your instincts. You know, if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. If you feel uncomfortable or something feels inappropriate, most likely some kind of boundary is being pushed. In the case of self-care, maybe one of your self-first boundaries is being pushed. And so if it doesn't feel right to you, don't do it. Listen to yourself. Trust yourself. You know, give yourself permission to listen to yourself and to honor your instincts. Honor yourself, because you deserve to put yourself first. So once you've had a chance to process what's going on and to get in touch with your feelings, you need to assert yourself. You need to communicate. Because if you feel that your boundaries are being violated, it's very important to speak up. Because if you don't speak up, how in the world are people going to how are people going to meet your needs? How are they going to support you? Ask for what you want, and if you need to, say no, but be polite about it and be firm. One of the things that I'm learning is that I have to also defend my boundaries, because when I set boundaries and communicate them, guaranteed that people are going to test them. Sometimes it's very intentional that they're testing the boundary. Sometimes they just forget because they're on automatic pilot. They're used to me being a certain way, and so they just keep doing it. So be prepared that your boundaries are going to be tested. If there's a very significant boundary that's being violated, when you communicate what your boundaries are, you also need to tell them what the consequences are when those boundaries are violated. The key thing with this is to always act with dignity and respect. Because remember, this isn't about controlling other people and controlling their feelings and emotions and behaviors. This is all about communicating. Communicating your needs and communicating how you want to be in relationship with them. One of the things I've learned is that if I'm feeling obligated or feeling like I need to make a sacrifice, I usually found that I still need to. I feel like I still need approval, and if I feel like I still need approval and I'm feeling obligated, I can't do it because I fear the consequences of not doing it. I need to do it because I want to. So where do you think you need some self-care boundaries? How can you put yourself first? So what I want to do is suggest that you do an exercise. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and then draw 4 lines perpendicular to that, so you end up with 8 different boxes on a page. Then, what I want you to do is to identify your self-care boundaries in each of these 8 areas: family, work, friends, spiritual, physical, financial, emotional, and social. So in each of those boxes on the page, identify what your boundaries are. About how you're going to know when you're not practicing self-care, but practicing others' care. And so make a note of some ideas. So for example, when it comes to family, I need to think about how far I'm willing to go in supporting others, especially when it might impact my ability to care for myself and do what I need and want to do to experience what I wish to experience in my life, so that I can feel comfortable in my own skin and be living life on my terms, doing what I feel I need to do to live a vibrant, excited, and engaged life. Let's take the financial boundaries, for example. Do you need to have a certain amount of cash on hand to feel comfortable, to feel secure? Or are you totally willing to risk it and spend all your money and then have to go out and make a bunch more money? Knowing what your boundaries are is very important, because then you can be congruent and stay within your own boundaries. And as well, if you're in a relationship with other people, living with someone else, or in a marriage, you can communicate your financial boundaries. So I invite you to take some time with this sheet and put something in each one of the 8 boxes about what your self-care boundaries, or you could think of it, instead of thinking of it as self-care boundaries, what are your self-care needs in each of these 8 areas? Take the time, write it down, and then we'll use it in the next workshop. Have a great day, live your life with passion, and I'll see you next time.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.